Good evening all. I'm Dr. Purna Durga. I'm a medical director and fertility consultant at MOM IVF and Research Center, Hyderabad. I thank Shield for giving me this opportunity to talk on a very common but a very difficult topic, PCO and infertility. Am I audible to all? Is my voice clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Definitely.
We all know that PCO is one of the most common endocrine disorder affecting women of the reproductive age. It's seen in around 8 to 11% of reproductive age women group. And it is the most common cause of anovulatory infertility which we see in women. In general, anovulatory infertility is seen in 70 to 80% of cases of PCO. So Indians are amongst the highest prevalent group in the world with 41% in the reproductive age group. In this way, we can treat PCO as an epidemic in India with a prevalence of 41%, and in almost 1 in every 5 women of reproductive age group have PCO, and the number is still rising. It is in the rise, so we can call PCO as an epidemic in India. And when it comes to the complications of PCO, it is very important to treat PCO not only regarding the fertility aspect. It's not only for a couple to become pregnant or they are having some anovulatory infertility, we have to give some ovulation induction drugs and make them pregnant. It's not. It affects almost in every aspect. When it comes to infertility, almost 50% of women with PCO are primary infertile, and 25% you can see secondary infertility. And there are obstetric complications as well with PCO. There is a 3 times higher risk of preeclampsia. There is a 3 times higher risk of gestational diabetes, and there is a risk of preterm deliveries and also a risk of IUGR. Apart from infertility and obstetric complications, it also affects the metabolic effects are also there, and the cardiovascular effects also. There is a twofold increased risk in myocardial infarction and hypertension, and there is a very high risk of developing type 2 diabetes mellitus. And because of the unopposed estrogen levels, which we see in PCO cases, there is a very high risk of endometrial carcinoma comparative to the normal population. And obviously, last but not the least, which can't be ignored, are the psychological effects of PCO, like very high prevalence of anxiety disorders, reducing the quality of life. So PCO should always be treated as a complex disorder. Not only we should not only focus on infertility, but also focus about all the complications which may arise because of PCO. So that's the reason we can call it as PCO as an epidemic in India. So we really don't know the etiology of PCO. It has an unknown etiology, but the most common etiology which was confirmed is because of the overproduction of androgens, which is primarily from the ovary, and it is associated with insulin resistance. Two important pathologies which we need to consider in PCO are overproduction of androgens and insulin resistance. These two things should be taken into consideration. So this is the etiopathogenesis of PCO, where genetics play a very important role. Genetics, and because of the lifestyle changes, there are hormonal changes and obesity. Because of all these factors, there is a hyperandrogenism and also insulin resistance. We also call as PCO as a low-grade inflammatory disease. Because of all these things, the clinical manifestations of PCO are evident. Like clinically, we see because of hyperandrogenism, we see hirsutism, acne, and as we all know, infertility, oligoovulation, anovulatory infertilities, and all. And as we discussed regarding the metabolic syndromes, type 2 diabetes mellitus, and increased cardiovascular risk factors, and also the psychological effects. The main etiopathogenesis are genetics, lifestyle disorders. These two are the most important etiologies which were seen. So in this picture, you can clearly see that because of the overproduction of androgens from the ovary, here the main pathology is at the ovary level, increased LH levels, increases the theca cells, which in turn increases the androgens, and these androgens in turn, because of genetics and insulin resistance, the skeletal muscle insulin resistance, we get acanthosis nigricans. There will be a decreased sex hormone binding globulin, decreased insulin absorption, glucose intolerance, diabetes. All these things are or a vicious cycle, which are the main important 2 points which are leading to every all these factors. Are one is genetics and another is insulin resistance. So this is the pathophysiology of PCO. So, what does insulin resistance, what does insulin do generally? It controls the LH levels. So, when insulin resistance is there, so LH levels will be very high. There will be increased LH level. Insulin is primarily responsible for controlling LH. Insulin mediates androgen production in theca cells. So, it controls the androgen levels. So, insulin resistance coexisting with PCO will be giving obesity and type 2 diabetes mellitus in future. And there is also inositol deficiency seen in PCO cases. Insulin resistance seems to be driven by deficiency of myoinositol and D-chiroinositol. Now we have seen, we know that a lot of pharma companies are coming with these inositols, myoinositol. There is a role of myoinositols and chiroinositols in PCO because of deficiency of these two will be causing insulin resistance. So myoinositol deficiency triggers disrupted insulin signaling, and it disrupts the LH-FSH balance, and the ratio of FSH-LH is reversed, and there is increased LH, and obviously subsequently the effects of increased LH, like the effects acts on the theca cells, increases androgens, all these things. So the main culprit here is insulin resistance. And because of the increase in LH levels, increase in the frequency and amplitude of LH, GnRH pulse, increases the LH levels. This is considered as the hallmark of a classical PCO. Excess secretion of LH, where the LH-FSH ratio is reversed, is considered as a hallmark of classic PCO, and it is more evident in obese women. So abnormal LH influence theca cells of the ovary, as I already discussed. As theca cells proliferate, they produce more androgens. So all PCOs do not have elevated LH, but they almost all the patients show elevated levels of androgens. Ovarian theca cells of women with PCO also have elevated CYP17 gene expression. Now we are having lot of gene panels, lot of genetic centers are now doing this PCO gene panel and all, where this CYP17 gene is one of the important gene we are seeing in PCO patients. And as we already discussed, PCO is also a low-grade inflammatory disease. So in PCO, that is the reason it is associated with the metabolic syndrome. It is also associated with metabolic syndrome, and there are changes in the inflammatory factors in patients with PCO. There is an increase in interleukin, CRP, TNF alpha. All these things are increased in patients with PCO, which cause the metabolic effects of the PCO. So these might stimulate immune response, increasing inflammatory factors such as C-reactive protein. It is a low-grade chronic inflammatory state. PCO is a low-grade chronic inflammatory state. So, so we are now understood what causes PCO, what is the etiology, and what are the main factors which lead to PCO and the effects of PCO. But why does PCO lead to infertility? What is the problem in PCO which leads to infertility? Generally, what happens? There will be a proper ovulation, fertilization, then implantation occurs, then the fetal viability, and the birth of a healthy live born. PCO patients have problem with all these factors. There is an effect in the ovulation. We already studied that 70% of PCOs are anovulatory. This again because of the insulin resistance, increased LH levels, there will be no ovulation. And if in IVF cycles also, whenever we are doing PCO, there is we have seen different profiles in PCO. Whenever I stimulate a PCO, we used to get a good quality oocytes. Sometimes we used to get empty follicles. Sometimes the quality of oocytes, even though we are getting 20, 25 oocytes, the quality of oocytes used to be very poor. Mostly poor quality oocytes we have seen in patients with obese PCO. So that's the reason weight loss management, lifestyle changes are very important, even for patients who are going for PCO, to improve the quality of it. So PCO might cause a poor quality oocyte and fertilization. We all know there is a hyperestrogenic condition in PCO because of the unopposed because of increasing androgens ultimately convert to estrogen. So increased estrogen levels we will be seeing. Whenever there is an increased estrogen levels, that causes a dysfunctional uterine bleeding, and the receptors in the endometrium are also affected. So fertilization and implantation rates are also very bad in cases with PCO. So there will be endometrial abnormality in them, and because of the hyperinsulinemia, fertilization and implantation rates might be because of the hyperinsulinemia, because of the effects of these. When in IVF cycles, there is a risk of abortion. Miscarriages are relatively more in cases with PCO when compared to the normal individuals. This is because of the hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance, which is giving missed abortions are more common in PCO because of all these hyperinsulinemia effects. And during pregnancy also, PCO people are more commonly prone for gestational diabetes, they're more prone for preeclampsia, they're more prone for small for gestational age babies, preterm deliveries. So in PCO in general is causing effect at each and every aspect of infertility, and also during pregnancy and also after death. So it is very important to treat PCO at the grassroots level. Not only if patient is obese and she first you treat her the main cause which is giving PCO. Then you treat the patient. Then you do ovulation induction. So you should always combine ovulation induction along with a lifestyle modifications, along with diet, exercise. All these things are play a very important role in management of PCO. So, spectrum of PCO from childhood to postmenopause, PCO can be presenting in childhood with increased AMH level, puberty, premature adrenarche, hyperandrogenism, increased AMH levels. When it comes to reproductive years, you can see infertility, increased AMH, glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, and in postmenopausal years, which is very rare to see PCO in postmenopause, but still, if you see if there is increased prevalence of hypertension and increased lipid profile levels. So now we understood about what is PCO and what are the how it affects. Then we come to the classification of PCO. How can you classify a woman as PCO? We have few criteria given. So Rotterdam's criteria is the most common criteria which was given in which we all know this diagnosis is confirmed by any 2 out of 3 criteria. But the most important thing is you have to exclude the other etiologies. That means oligo, what are the criteria given by Rotterdam's? It is oligo or anovulation, biochemical and clinical signs of hyperandrogenism. Biochemical means we all know when you see, when you do a blood investigation to testosterone, androstenedione and DHEAs, you do when the levels are more. When it comes to clinical, it is we see acne, hirsutism and acanthosis nigricans. Polycystic ovaries morphology, we see on ultrasound when they are more than 12 follicles. Now the recent guidelines say that they're more than 20 follicles and when involving more than 10 ml. But the main important thing is we have to exclude other causes of hyperandrogenism like Cushing's, like androgen secreting tumors. So all these things. So the main aim of investigating is to exclude other causes of hyperandrogenism, right? So the other criteria which was given is NIH, where they have taken only oligo and anovulation and clinical and biochemical signs of hyperandrogenism. they have not taken into the consideration of ultrasound picture of polycystic ovaries. And in whatever classification, it should be always, you should exclude the other causes of hyperandrogenism like congenital adrenal hyperplasia, androgen secreting tumors, and Cushing's. And the other and the recent criteria, a lot of people are found phenotypes. Then they have classified PC4 into four phenotypes: A, B, C, D, taking on only these three signs and symptoms into consideration, like hyperandrogenism and hirsutism, ovulatory dysfunction, PCO morphology. So if all three are present, we call it as phenotype A. When there are only two, hyperandrogenism and ovulatory dysfunction, like NIH classification, we call it as phenotype B. When you see only hyperandrogenism and polycystic morphology, you see phenotype C. And you don't see hyperandrogenism, then you see, classify it as phenotype D. So the mildest form is the fourth, and the third is the ovulatory PCO. The most severe is where all the three signs and symptoms are present. So like this, we can classify PCO into phenotypes as well. And we all know Asian women are as we already discussed, 41% of Indian women are having PCO in the reproductive age group. The classical phenotype occurred in 54.6% of PCO women in Asian population. And it is also associated with insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Oligomenorrhea occurred in 92.3%. So the incidence of obesity was significantly greater in phenotype A, B, and C when compared to phenotype D. So what are the clinical features? After classification, now we come to the clinical features. What are the clinical features of PCO? When it comes to gynecological point, they present with irregular menses and infertility, metabolic, insulin resistance, obesity, increased chances of type 2 diabetes, acanthosis nigricans, and when the androgenic effects like alopecia, hirsutism, and acne. So now we go into a detail into each and every clinical characteristic of PCO. We just go quickly. The first thing is irregular cycles and ovulatory dysfunction. We all know when to call a regular menstrual cycle. Irregular cycles are most common immediately after menarche. We call it as irregular if they are less than 21 days or more than 35 days of cycles, or less than 8 cycles per year. We call it as irregular menstrual cycles. It's the same thing. So biochemical hyperandrogenism, how you call when you call it as hyperandrogenism, when you do a blood investigation, assessment of biochemical hyperandrogenism is most useful in establishing the diagnosis of PCO, and lot of classifications are based on hyperandrogenism, and to also identify the phenotype also it is very important. So we all know androgens are C19 steroids. So what are the androgens? We see testosterone, dehydroepiandrosterone acetate. These are the two androgens which we measure in the blood. So androgens are all, we all know androgens, the sources of androgens might be 20% from the adrenal and 80% from the ovaries. So what is the pathophysiology of hyperandrogenism? There will be increased ovarian androgens. So theca cell will be producing more of androgens, and some amount of androgen is also from the adrenal gland. So these will disturb the HPO axis and increases the LH levels as and arrest the growth of the follicles. And there is also increased insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia will be there. So these are all the effects of increased androgens in the cases of PCO. So what we calculate free testosterone, we do free androgen index, and we know testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, we only calculate the free testosterone available. Almost 90% of the testosterone is bound to sex hormone binding globulin. In PCO, sex hormone binding globulin levels decreases, so the free testosterone levels will be more. So we have to use high quality assays. such as liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry, mass and extraction chromatography, immunoassays to calculate free testosterone, and should be used for the most accurate assessment in PCO. Androstenedione and D-epiandrosterone sulfate could be considered if total or free testosterone are not elevated. However, these provide limited additional information in diagnosis of PCO. Let me be very clear. Measuring androgens, biochemical measurement of androgens, I don't do routinely. It's only when I really suspect that we have to evaluate, as the classification is clearly saying, if to rule out the other causes of hyperandrogenemia, if I'm suspecting any other disorder apart from PCO, then only I do all these investigations. Otherwise, I go with my clinical and ultrasound findings. But these are the guidelines given. So as androgens increases, theca cell proliferation increases, which increases the LH levels, and androstenedione increases, and androstenedione again aromatizing occurs, estradiol levels increase. So once when the estrogen levels are more, it suppresses the ovulation. That is what happens in normal cycle also. What happens, why only there is only one dominant follicle is growing? Once the follicle attains dominance, it secretes estrogen. Once the estrogen levels increases, it suppresses the other follicles and there is no growth of the other follicles. Same thing happens in PCOS. Because of the excess androgens, there is excess production of estrogens as well. Aromatization occurs, estrogen levels will be increased. So there is a hyperestrogenic state in PCO that suppresses the ovulation again. So that's how the whole mechanism is entered. Next is the clinical hyperandrogenism. So 70 to 80% of PCO women exhibit clinical manifestations of hyperandrogenism like acne, alopecia, hirsutism. Acne, most commonly in adolescent age group, they manifest with acne. It is an inflammatory disease of sebaceous glands manifested by pimples, especially on face, back and chest. Alopecia, hirsutism. This is defined as the excessive growth of terminal hair in androgen dependent areas of the body in women. We have a scale and there are so many effects of hyperandrogenism, not only regarding to infertility. Whenever there is a hyperandrogenism, as I already told you, you have to take a detailed history to exclude all these factors like androgen producing tumors, Cushing disease, and drug history. Drug history is very important. When you're taking a detailed history, you should ask about any anti-epileptic drugs, corticosteroids, any menodoxil. All these drugs will be causing hyperandrogenism. Taking a detailed drug history is also very, very important whenever you see a patient with hirsutism, alopecia, or acne, severe acne. We have few scales to measure hirsutism. Ferryman-Galway score more than 8 considered as hirsutism, and you can also classify alopecia depending on the Lidwig visual scale. And acne, just we can visual assessment for evaluating acne. This is how we evaluate a clinical hyperandrogenism. Then comes the ultrasound picture. Ultrasound less than 8 years after menarche, you obviously see multiple follicles. We should not confuse with PCO. So less than 20 years, they will be having a good ovarian reserve. More than 8 years after menarche, now the classification is changed. Now they are saying previously we used to see only 12, more than 12 follicles per ovary we used to consider as PCO, but now the follicle number per ovary is more than 20 or ovarian volume more than 10 ml should be considered as a PCO morphology. So ultrasound should not be used for the diagnosis of PCO in those with gynecological age less than 8 years due to high incidence of multifollicular ovaries in this life stage. What is the evidence says? AFC is variable, ovarian volume is less sensitivity than AFC, vascularization of ovarian stoma. What we see in PCO is still investigational. So it is always an added finding in PCO plus whatever the hyperandrogenism, irregular menstrual cycle should be there. Any 2 out of 3 we are taking. So transvaginal ultrasound approach is preferred in the diagnosis of PCO. Better not to do a transabdominal ultrasound. It's very difficult to count the number of antral follicles through transabdominal ultrasound. Whenever you're using a transabdominal ultrasound, it's better you go with the ovarian volume assessment. Yeah, new guidelines, as I've already told you, in 2018, its number of follicles per ovary are more than 20 and ovarian volume more than 10 ml is taken into consideration. And obviously, we should exclude the cysts and all. Uh, in patients with irregular menstrual cycles and hyperandrogenism, an ovarian ultrasound is not necessary for PCO diagnosis. However, ultrasound will definitely complete the PCO phenotype. So, as depending on the other classifications, it's mainly the irregular menstrual cycles and hyperandrogenism is important. Ultrasound diagnosis is always added one to complete the PCO phenotype. So how to report a PCO morphology? Or whenever you're reporting a PCO, you should always mention the last menstrual period, which probe you are using, vaginal or abdominal, and you should you should count the total follicle per ovary measuring 2 to 9 mm size, and you should always measure the 3 dimensions to get the volume of each ovary, mention the endometrial thickness, and also mention any other associated pathologies like ovarian cyst or corpus luteal cyst or anything. So this is how you have to report a PCO morphology. Whenever you're doing the scan, you should take into all this and mention it in your scan findings. And next one is about the AMH. AMH, we all know, I think lot of talks and are now going on AMH. See, obviously, there are more number of follicles in PCO. Obviously, the AMH levels are more in women with polycystic ovary. So, AMH is basically a glycoprotein, and it is increased 2 to 3-fold in patients with PCO with reproductive age group. It is useful. It is a useful marker of ovarian reserve. So, serum AMH levels should not be used as an alternate for the detection of PCO. It is used as an ovarian marker to assess the ovarian reserve of the female, but it should not be used as an alternate for the detection of PCOS or a single test for the diagnosis of PCO. Okay. Next is the ethnic variation. We all know that in Southeast Asians, there is an increased central adiposity, insulin resistance, diabetes, and metabolic risk, acanthosis nigricans. These all the features of PCO are more significant in Southeast Asians, and there is a higher body mass index in Caucasian women, more hirsutism in Middle East and Mediterranean women. Menopause, diagnosis of PCO in menopause is very rare. We should only consider the postmenopausal persistence of PCO if she is already a known case of PCO. A diagnosis of PCO post-menopause should be considered only if there is a past diagnosis of PCO and a long-term history of irregular menstrual cycles and hyperandrogenism and PCO morphology during the reproductive years. Cardiovascular risk, yes, definitely there is a high risk of cardiovascular risk factors in PCO. Whenever PCO is associated with these risk factors, there is a very high risk of cardiovascular diseases like obesity, cigarette smoking, dyslipidemia, hypertension, impaired GTT, and lack of physical activity definitely add to the cardiovascular risk. So, regular monitoring for weight changes and excess weight, height, and BMI should be regularly monitored for these women. Blood pressure should be monitored in cases with PCO, should be measured annually or more frequently if there are any risk factors. Overweight and obese women with PCO, regardless of age, should have a fasting lipid profile. Thereafter, frequency of measurement should be based on the prevalence of hyperlipidemia and the global cardiovascular risk. And gestational diabetes, regardless of the age, whoever comes to you, if it is a case of PCO, definitely a GTT should be done in every patient who comes to us with features of PCO. What are the clinical presentations of insulin resistance? They may present with lethargy, hunger, difficulty concentrating, weight gain around the middle belly, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol levels. So glycemic status should be assessed at baseline in all women with PCO irrespective of their age. So what's the line of management for insulin resistance? We don't have any drugs to maintain to reduce insulin resistance. Whatever drugs we are using, but apart from that, the main important thing is having a low carbohydrate diet, low calorie diets. In high obese cases, bariatric surgeries are helpful, and exercise along with diet is very, very important. Obstructive sleep apnea, if any symptoms are there, it is definitely better to refer to a specialist. As I already mentioned, there is a very high risk of 2 to 6 fold increase in the risk of endometrial cancer in patients with PCO. And as we all discussed, there is a risk of psychological and emotional depression and body shaming. All these things are very high in cases with PCO. These conditions should be treated early and should be referred to a psychologist as early as possible. And there is also effect on psychosexual functions because of the features of PCO like hirsutism, menstrual disturbances, infertility, feeling abnormal. All these things impact the sexual life and relationships in this. So it's very important to treat all this. Apart from treating infertility, treating the eating disorders like anorexia nervosa, bulimia, all these things should also be, you should take a detailed history about the psychosexual functions, eating disorders, all these things should be also be taken care of. So what are the lifestyle advice you give to them? We all know stressful lifestyle gives inadequate sleep, lack of physical activity, which in turn gives insulin resistance, hormonal imbalance, PCO, and infertility. So what is the lifestyle advice we give? It's a dietary advice, 1200 to 1500 kilocalories per day of diet should be given, and depending on individual energy requirements, body weight, and physical activity levels. And exercise, it's very, very important. At least 150 minutes per week of moderate exercise or 75 minutes per minute per week of a vigorous exercise should be advised. Adolescents obviously can do more. Now comes the management options. What are the management options? We learned what is PCO, what is the classification, what are the etiopathogenesis and the effects of PCO, how to screen. Now, how to manage a patient with PCO. The first line treatment will always focus on improving the lifestyle. In obese patients, weight loss, changing diet, physical activity should be emphasized. Weight loss decreases serum insulin levels, androgen levels, reduce the risk of glucose intolerance and type 2 diabetes. Pharmacological interventions in the presence of insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, or dyslipidemia that persist even after lifestyle. What are the pharmacological interventions we have? One is metformin and the other is the myoinositol and dechloroinositol. So basically these are the things which we have in managing of PCO. We have insulin sensitizers like metformin, D-inositol and myoinositol, anti-androgens, spironolactone, cyproterone acetate, OC pills, oral contraceptive pills, ovulation induction agents like clomiphene, letrozole, anastrozole, gonadotropins. Cosmetic, we can do cosmetic therapy and others like laparoscopic ovarian drilling. So this is the current treatment profile we have. So how do you treat anovulatory infertility? We know the treatment of choice, the drug of choice in anovulatory infertility in PCO is letrozole. Now clomiphene is not the first line treatment in PCO cases. Letrozole is a drug of choice in cases of PCO, and also evidences confirm efficacy of inositols also in restoring fertility in PCO patients. You can add if she is obese, and is there a proven indication for adding letrozole, metformin, or inositols, you can add along with the letrozole. And the other option is surgical ovarian drilling. It is recommended as a second line therapy. First, always you start with medical management, then comes to the surgical management. And multiple pregnancy rates are reduced following laparoscopic drilling. Adjuvant therapy after drilling with clomiphene may be necessary. Ovarian drilling does not appear to improve metabolic abnormalities in PCO. So as we already studied, 30% of the women with PCO, even though they have PCO, have no problems getting pregnant. About 70% might experience problems getting pregnant. So this is the algorithm given by Eshrey in treatment of infertility in PCO. The first line is non-pharmacological management of infertility. What are the non-pharmacological management? Lifestyle modifications. That means diet and exercise. This comes the first line therapy, which are the pharmacological management, in which letrozole is considered as a drug of choice in PCO. Next is clomiphene citrate. When there is a clinical evidence of insulin resistance, you can always add metformin or inositol. Giving plain metformin as an ovulation induction agent is not proven, and when nothing is helpful, like when there is a clomiphene resistance, you can always, or letrozole is not working, you can always go with gonadotropins. Then the second line of management comes. The second line of management are going for a total gonadotropin cycles and or going for a laparoscopic ovarian drilling. And the third line of management could be other appropriate, including IVF. So first we start with non-pharmacological managements like lifestyle modification, then comes the pharmacological, then comes the gonadotropin. The third and last option will be IVF. So, letrozole, clomiphene, and metformin. Letrozole should be considered as a first-line therapy for ovulation induction in women with PCO with anovulatory infertility. Otherwise, when letrozole is not available or it's not working, then you can try with clomiphene citrate. Metformin can be added in women with anovulatory infertility with obesity. When BMI is more than 30, you can combine metformin plus clomiphene rather than giving plain metformin. See, metformin acts in so many ways. It acts as a morphological, improving the ovarian morphology, reducing the expression of vascular endothelial growth factor. It reduces the androgen-mediated stimulation of follicular growth, and it also reduces the insulin resistance. So it acts at every aspect of the PCO criteria. So metformin, but it should be given only once insulin resistance is proven. Metformin treatment criteria: when there are 8 or fewer menses per year, hirsutism or elevated androgens, acanthosis nigricans, history of gestational diabetes, PCO appearing ovaries, family history of diabetes, and fasting insulin more than 10 milli international units per ml or 2 hours more than 50. Inositol is another promising drug in cases of insulin resistance. There are two receptors in insulin, you know, alpha and beta. The beta receptor is in the cell membrane. It is phosphorylated with insulin receptor substrates are activated, and P13K docks to the insulin receptor substrates and leads to the phosphorylation of phosphatidol inositol, eventuating the insulin action. So what does myoinositol does? It increases the insulin sensitivity by making more phosphatidylcholine inositol available. So this is the mechanism how myoinositol acts. So it is proven that both myoinositol and D-chiro-inositol are deficient in PCO women. So adding these inositols might improve the insulin resistance in PCO women. And then comes the gonadotropin. These are the second line of treatment for ovulation induction, to be used in clomiphene resistant or not responding to letrozole. You can also add metformin along with gonadotropins. Whenever you're starting gonadotropins, you should always take into a few points into consideration, like cost and the need to monitor the second cycle. Never ever leave a cycle of gonadotropin unmonitored. It's very important. You should monitor the cycle thoroughly, and low dose gonadotropin protocol should always be used to reduce the number of follicles and to prevent OHSS and to reduce the risk and implications of multiple pregnancies. Laparoscopic ovarian surgery, what is the evidence says? It should be a second line therapy for women with PCO who are clomiphene resistant or letrozole resistant with anovulatory infertility and no other infertility factors. But If you have other infertility factors, there is associated endometriosis or there is associated tubal block or anything, then it becomes the first line treatment if there laparoscopy is indicated for any other reason apart from PC. So what we should thoroughly counsel the women with the risk involved with the surgery, cost, and intraoperative, postoperative risk. And there is a slight risk of reducing the ovarian reserve when you excessively cauterize the ovary. And there is a risk of periadnexal adhesion formation also might be there. Bariatric surgery, role of bariatric surgery. Bariatric surgery should be considered as an experimental therapy in women with PCO for the purpose of having healthy baby with risk to benefit ratio. Bariatric surgery should be counseled regarding the cost and need for a structured weight management program involving diet, physical activity, and interventions to improve psychological, musculoskeletal, and cardiovascular health to continue post-operative. So we should also consider about the perinatal risks such as small for gestational age, preterm deliveries, and all these risks should also be taken into consideration, and we should avoid pregnancy for at least 12 months after bariatric surgery. Recommendation for IVF. IVF is considered as a third line therapy when nothing works. Obviously, the drug of choice is recombinant FSH. Antagonist protocol is preferred over agonist. This reduces the duration of stimulation, reduces the cost, and reduces the OHSS. In antagonist protocol, there is it's better we don't do, now we are not doing fresh transfers at all in PCO. We all go for frozen cycles. And there is the advantage of triggering with GnRH agonist and freezing of all embryos in antagonist cycles. So we always start with low dose. We can start with 150 international units, and depending on the response, we can always increase the dose and see. Always low dose protocols, step-up protocols are recommended in our IVF cycles. And as I already mentioned, antagonist is advised in PCO. There is a reduced OHS level, there is short duration of treatment, low cost, lesser dose of gonadotropin required, and more patient friendly. So antagonists are the drug of choices in PCO. And to reduce the risk of OHS also, we can always freeze all the ovaries whenever you are stimulating a patient of PCO, and there is an added advantage of giving an agonist trigger whenever using an antagonist protocol. A lot of studies have come which shows that antagonist protocol is the protocol of choice in PCO. So, yeah. How to improve the endometrial receptivity in PCO? Because of the unopposed estrogen, as I told you, there is a high risk of implantation failures in PCO. This can be reduced by only the most important thing is weight loss. Weight loss or insulin sensitizers have been shown to reduce circulating insulin and androgen levels and to improve reproductive outcomes in patients with PCO. So to conclude, patients with PCO present a challenge for reproductive motion. They present with many complications and challenges for IVF treatment. The use of calculated low-dose stimulation strategy with step-up protocols are advised. We should always carefully select the FSH dose to reduce the risk of OHSS. The choice of starting dose is always calculated based on the AMH levels, age, AFC, BMI, and the PCO diagnosis of the patient. It is a multifaceted condition. It requires a multidisciplinary approach, not only treating the infertility and anovulation, and a holistic care is required. Lifestyle modifications are the principal treatments. Low-dose gonadotropins are first-line agents when affordability and acceptability is not an issue. IVF is indicated when previous interventions are failed or any other associated indications for IVF is there. Minocytals are promising in cases of insulin resistance. They reduce the insulin levels and improve the egg oocyte quality as well. Thank you all for the patient listening.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Thank you very much. As the doctors, they put their questions in the chat box, I will convey those questions to you. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, regarding the first line management, which is lifestyle modifications, ma'am, how useful it is in PCOS, and what is the success rate do you see in routine practice?
Lifestyle modification is the most important thing, even though whenever you're starting treatment also, whenever you're starting ovulation inductions also, simultaneously you should ask the patient to maintain their diet, exercise. It's a very, very important thing. I have seen lot of patients, especially endometrium. I'm talking about endometrium is the key. I feel in my, whenever we are doing so many IVF cycles, I feel that endometrium is very important. In PCO patients, endometrium is not very good. So this reduction in weight and maintaining your diet, healthy lifestyle definitely improves your results whenever you're planning whatever treatment you're planning. So if patient can lose weight and come, it's very good. If they don't have time or they can't lose weight, at least whenever you're giving treatment, it's always better you give a diet chart along with that and try to motivate the patient to lose weight. Even 5% reduction in weight improve our results in whatever treatment, whether it is ovulation induction or your IVF cycles, whatever. It is very important.
Yes, ma'am, right. Thank you very much. There is a question from Dr. Rajeshwari. She is requesting the dosage of metformin and PCOS.
Yeah, metformin dose is 1500 milligrams. Minimum we should give is 1500 milligrams. But before starting metformin, we have to do LFT, liver function test, and then start metformin. The dose given is 1500 milligrams. It can be gradually increased. You can start with 500 OD, then increase to BD, and then TID. But the dose required is 1500 milligrams per day.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, in the adolescents also the similar dose is required, or how it is titrated?
Yeah, the dose required is 1500 milligrams, but you can slowly increase the dose. You can start with $1 because the tolerability of metformin is not very good. It leads to a lot of side effects. So you should always start with lower dose, but the recommended dose, whether of any age, is 1500 milligrams.
Right, ma'am. Thank you very much. I don't see any additional questions. Let's wait for additional questions, ma'am.
How to manage a lean PCO patient? Yeah, it's the toughest thing. But still, even though the patient is lean, obviously maintaining a healthy diet and exercise is important for anyone, even though she is lean or obese. Along with that, you can obviously, what is the problem? As we discussed, whether she is an adolescent group or reproductive, what is her concern? Depending on that, we have to manage her concern. But exercise and diet, I feel, is important even though she is lean or obese.
Right, ma'am. Thank you.
Someone is asking LUF. LUF is common is PCO. How you treat her? Actually, LUF is luteinized unruptured follicle. So, luteinized unruptured follicle is mostly commonly seen in cases with poor oocyte quality. Whenever the quality of oocyte is not good, like in cases for endometriosis, in PCO, in those cases you see LUF. LUF, the treatment of choice again is you can try with gonadotropin. If you are using oral agents, you can shift them to gonadotropin and see to improve the quality of oocytes. And as I told you again, if she is obese, weight loss is the important thing which we need to advise. But you can change the choice of drug which you are using. If you are using oral, you can always switch to gonadotropin and trigger at around 16, 17 mm and see.
Right, ma'am. The next question is about the ovulation induction drugs. How long can we try?
Yeah, the maximum generally in my practice, what we can maximum try ovulation induction drugs for 6 cycles, and the maximum ovulation inductions we can give in women's whole lifetime is I think 12 cycles. So generally what I see is we try with normal, everything is being normal, we try ovulation induction for 6 cycles, not working out, 3 cycles of IUI, then IVF. That's the thing we follow. But the maximum cycles, ovulation inductions you can give is maximum of 6.
Right,
and
ma'am.
12 in a woman's lifetime, ovarian stimulations.
Correct. So how long metformin can be given in adolescent patients?
There should be a reason to give metformin in adolescents. See, you can always try with lifestyle and diet in adolescents, right? So first you try with these things. Metformin mostly we give not adolescent if there is a altered GTT or any proven insulin resistance, then only you add metformin in adolescent, not to reduce PCO. That is the guidelines are also saying that metformin should not be used alone as a treatment option for PCO. It should be always combined with clomiphene or letrozole. But in adolescents, it is really a proven. There is a altered glucose intolerance. Those cases you can add metformin. Otherwise, for PCO treatment, I don't think metformin is an option for adolescents. This is mostly for reproductive age women when there is a proven insulin resistance or any proven type 2 diabetes or altered GTT, all these things. So I think that's, I think I
Yes,
have
ma'am,
answered.
correct. In case of premature LH search, what is the drug of choice and dose and the management?
Yeah, to prevent again premature alert surge will also happen whenever the quality of oocyte is not very good. Yes, you can add antagonist whenever you're doing your normal ovulation induction studies. First cycle you will come to know if you are seeing a follicle at 14-15 size and again the next scan the follicle is disappeared, then there is a premature LS surge and premature ovulation. In those cases, you can always add antagonist whenever the follicle reaches 14 mm and continue till the antagonist till it reaches the follicle reaches 18 mm and then trigger. That is one of the option. And antagonist, what drug? Antagonist, and the dose is 0.25 milligrams. And someone, Dr. Chitra Shankar, any preference of gonadotropin, FSH or HMG? See, in PCO, the preferred gonadotropin is recombinant FSH, but in some cases, I felt that HMG gives a better result than FSH, especially in obese PCO. So yeah, that's my personal experience, but the studies and all says that FSH is the drug of choice, but I do use HMG in cases with PCO.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is if there are irregular cycles, then how to manage that?
How to manage irregular cycles in lean
Lean
PCO?
PCOS.
Yeah, this was we have already studied, right? Giving you can give a low dose oral contraceptive pills. When there is a hyperandrogenic features, also you can add cyproterone acetate containing pills can be given. So yes, then yeah, mostly managing with OC pills are main drug of choice.
Right, ma'am. And the preference for the first line management, clomiphene or letrozole?
Obviously, letrozole is the drug of choice in PCO. It is an aromatase inhibitor. It acts at the peripheral level. As we know, when you use clomiphene, it acts at the central level. There is a high chances of multiple follicular recruitments, high incidence of OHSs, and all with clomiphene in PCO. Letrozole is the drug of choice in PCO. And the dose you give max is like I try so many types of protocols with letrozole. I'm so fascinated and with letrozole. I start with 5 milligram stat for 5 days. I see. I also use the step up protocol where I give day one tablet, two tablets on day two, three tablets on day three, and four tablets on day five. But the total dose of letrozole I give a total 10 tablets. But the maximum dose you can give is 7.5 according to the literature. But I try to add gonadotropins, not increase the dose of letrozole, but add gonadotropins if the response is not good. And I tried this step up protocol as well, where I use 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams in the same cycle.
Yes, ma'am.
Treatment of
Thank you.
acanthosis nigricans in adolescent PCO. Yeah. See, acanthosis nigricans, why it happened? Because purely of the insulin resistance. So, again, the emphasis on lifestyle management. Maximum obese people only will have acanthosis. Very rare to see acanthosis nigricans in a lean PCO patients. Obesity is the main cause for this. So, again, lifestyle management is uh, comes into role here.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we
Pioglitazone.
try pioglitazone? I really don't have much idea. I didn't use it. But yeah, literature says you can use pioglitazone also, but I didn't use it much. No idea much.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Let's see any additional questions. So, I guess there are no more questions from the doctors. So yes, ma'am. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for this.
Thanks so much, ma'am,
Yes,
Thank you,
for your
interactive
Professor.
time
session.
and
Thank
Yeah.
you.
yeah,
Thank you
thanks,
so
ma'am.
much. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm leaving the meeting then. Okay?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Chalo,
Yes,
bye.
ma'am. Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Thank you all.